Hey, welcome to another episode of Clear Lake Connections, where we talk to the people behind the businesses of Bay Area, Houston, and we are proudly sponsored by UTMB Health. Today from UTMB, I have Blair Brown, and tell us what it is you do at UTMB.
Well, I've worked at UTMB for over a decade. I am a registered dietitian. My background, I worked in the inpatient side in the hospital at John Seeley in Galveston. I did organ transplant and critical care. And in my current role, I am the program director for the Master of Science and Dietetic Internship in the School of Health Professions.
So tell me about hospital food, because I know it had a bad rap for a long time, but I think people are paying attention to it. And I just visited a friend in I guess it was not John Seeley. What's the other one right next to it?
Jenny Seeley.
Yes, Jenny Seeley. And he was raving about the food.
Yes.
So you probably had something to do with that?
So UTMB contracts with Sodexo, which is the food service management company, and they have really kind of taken charge and redone the menus. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that a lot of people don't see. I don't envy the food service directors at all because they have a really hard job. It's hard to cook food in mass quantities and get it out to people. And it's also hard because everyone in the hospital too is sick. Mm-hmm. And you know, when you're sick and you don't really feel well, nothing really tastes good, right? So they have a really hard job. I think they've done a really good job of really trying to put a focus on fresh foods, put a healthier spin, but also give patients a little more option. A lot of times, I don't know if you've ever been in the hospital sick, you don't get a lot of choices. You're kind of at the mercy of everybody else, but your food options is the one thing you can control. So I think Sodexo has done a really good job of giving patients the options to be able to choose what they want to eat.
Yeah, and I think everywhere I've been, I've noticed that more choice and really trying to make people feel more comfortable. And I remember going to visit my mom, and she'd want to stay an extra day because she liked the food so much. And I thought, wow, that's next level.
Yes, it is.
So, dietitian.
Yes.
It's the beginning of the year. Everybody's made New Year's resolutions. Almost always one of them is to eat better.
Always.
Give us a quick rundown of what people can be doing right away to improve their diet.
I think the first thing to do is to really take a look at what you're eating, whether that's using an app or a website or just writing down pen and paper, writing down everything you eat and drink in a day. There's a lot of times, and I know I'm guilty of it too, where I'll go the whole day and then when I reflect back on what I ate, I'm like, oh, wow, Blair, I ate a lot of interesting things that particular day. And it's going to vary from person to person. So I think the first thing is to get an idea of maybe what you are eating. What are your eating habits? Where do you eat your meals? Is it at a table? Is it on the couch? Is it at your desk? Is it out to eat a lot? I think that's really a good starting point for everybody. And then if you notice habits, or I tend to eat more junk food or fried foods when I'm feeling sad, or maybe when my schedule is really busy and I don't have time to plan, kind of paying attention to those things really is a good starting point to identify what areas you needed to make changes.
You mentioned something interesting, and I've had this with other people from UTMB, and you guys seem to really take a holistic approach. And I thought you brought that up about the relationship between food and mood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dive into that a little more for us.
Food is comfort for people, at least for me growing up. Or have you ever been really upset? Is there a particular food you like to eat? It's mine. I love eating ice cream. Yes, the dietitian eats ice cream. Love it. Love me a pint of Bluebell or Ben & Jerry's, right? And so I find that when I've worked with patients, particularly when they're trying to lose weight or maintain their weight, mood really reflects kind of their diet choices, as well as even just our experiences growing up, how we grew up in our family's traditions and the way our family put focus on meal times. I grew up in a family, not a huge family, but my mom didn't know how to cook for just us. It was like she was cooking for a family of 20 people. So then when I went off to school in college, I'm living by myself, and all I know how to cook are these recipes that giant meals, right? So that also affects, our patterns, our meal patterns, but definitely mood is a big thing. When you're angry, or even Valentine's Day is coming up, right? People tend to go out to eat. and you're going to pick somewhere where you really love going and probably have some sort of memory or attachment to, or you're going to, you may go out with family members or your loved one, right? So I think food just in general focuses around feelings and emotion, comfort.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. You learn it from your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I remember we went on a cruise with the kids, and they picked so much food, but they wouldn't eat all of it. And I realized I was finishing all their meals for them, and I'm like, whoa, no, got to stop that. That whole clean plate club thing is...
Oh, I grew up with that,
and
too.
then I remember distinctly, yeah, that's what we did at home. You finished it because that was the only way you got to leave the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up with, you got to clean your plate before you can leave the table, right? And so, but that kind of mantra is really changing now that a lot more people are obese. The idea of having to clean your plate is kind of no more. It took me a while to get out of that because I felt bad for leaving food on my plate, particularly if I went out to a restaurant too. Mm-hmm. I'd want to clean my plate. Can't do that anymore.
And they overserve on the portion
size.
Is that
absolutely.
probably the number one mistake people make?
Yes.
Is serving size?
Yes, serving size for sure.
How can we limit that? I mean, because especially if you go out to eat, some of these restaurants, it's enough to feed 2 people.
Yes. Not all restaurants, but most restaurants, the serving sizes you're going to get are 2 or 3 times more than what would be considered a normal serving size according to the USDA. So what you can do is, I've had individuals where they'll go immediately ask for a to-go box and split everything on their plate and put part of it immediately away into a to-go box, and then they can eat the rest. Or people share plates. So if whoever you're going out to eat with, if you have somebody that you're going out to eat with, split an entree together. If you go out to eat at lunchtime, usually the lunch portions are smaller, depending on the restaurant. But I think for me, what is helpful is immediately kind of putting it away. Ask for a to-go box immediately. Or if you have the control, to only eat half and then save the rest to put in a to-go box towards the end of the meal.
So as a dietitian, have you studied foods from around the world? Because I know, like, for example, Japan, they have almost zero heart disease, right? The Mediterranean, their diet's very, very healthy as well, for the most part. What are some of the healthy diets out there that we could pinpoint and have listeners go and really investigate if they want to try to live a healthier lifestyle?
Yeah. So every culture has their own diet. The Mediterranean diet has really been big in the media right now. I think what's interesting when you look at those cultures, genetics does play a factor in it. So depending on the culture, some cultures and ethnicities have a higher rate of heart disease or diabetes just based on genetics alone. But diet plays into a factor. But one thing that people, I think in the United States, we don't move a lot. In a lot of these other cultures, they tend to use walking as their mode of transportation, or they're more active. Or from here, I got in my car and I drove here today, right? But in other cultures, either you've got to walk to the public transit and then take the public train or bus, right? So I think here in the United States, we don't move enough, is my aspect. Now, we also, fast food is king here too. We live very busy lifestyles. And for our busy lifestyles, we're jumping in the car, going from point A to point B, right? And on the way, like baseball, Little League season is starting up soon for me. I'm going to be guilty of that too. Picking the kids up from school. Oh, let's swing by, Whataburger, one of my favorites, by the way. Absolutely. And then getting in the car, going to the baseball fields. Oh, and there's a concession stand there. They're going to want candy. They're going to want something. So I think in the United States, convenience foods and then not moving enough is, I think, what plays into our obesity epidemic.
Yeah, and I've also noticed when I travel abroad, so for example, if you get a Fanta soda in Spain, it has real sugar and actual fruit in it.
Yes.
Talk to us about what are we putting into our bodies here in America when you're it's like this idea of mass production. It really destroys the quality of food.
Again, I think it's just convenience. I don't work in the food service industry, and that could be a whole other podcast session in itself too. you know, I think a lot of it comes down to cost. You know, if you're running a business, you're going to try to find ways to cut your costs. And I think it just comes down to convenience is what it comes down to. But I think there's definitely something to be said when it comes to looking at some of the other countries and, you know, the dyes that they've eliminated in foods and how their populations have maybe benefited from that. I think there's much more research that needs to be done on the effects of food, coloring that goes into food.
Red dye 40, right?
Yes,
that's the big one everybody talks about.
Yes. And then, you know, and there's different standards for foods or different standards for cosmetics. So do I think there probably should be a large review of that? Yes. Do I want to tackle that? Absolutely not. I'll save that for somebody else.
Yeah. So give me like your top 3 tips for eating healthier. Like, so for example, I remember when my dad had his heart attack, basically salt was gone from our house forever.
Salt's a big one, particularly in heart disease. That's probably number 1, right? And that's hard. I did heart failure for a long time at UTMB, and that was probably one of the things I struggled with the most, getting my patients to really grasp the concept of salt. That's also a whole nother podcast in itself. Top 3 tips, okay, for eating healthy. Yes. Okay.
Starting this new year and really
starting
just
this new year.
See if you can get into the habit of, you know, maybe eating just any improvement in your diet can pay huge dividends.
So I talked about the one about just kind of taking a look back, an overall view of your diet in general, whether that's using an app or website, taking an overall glance and calculating how many calories, how many grams of protein you're getting in your day. That's one. Because oftentimes you don't know. And even as a dietitian, I have a fairly good idea of the amount of calories in foods. It's also a buzzkill and a bummer too, right? Yeah. You know, when you sit down at the Cheesecake Factory, now they do have their calorie content on most things. Some restaurants don't, but you can eat in your entire day's worth of recommended calories just in one sitting. Right?
I've noticed that.
You can, yes. So having a good idea of what you're eating, of how much you're eating is 1. 2, I think incorporating color into your diet. Fruits, vegetables, whether they're fresh, whether they're frozen, canned, you want to look for ones that are lower in sodium or no added salt. That's a lot of extra salt anybody doesn't need in canned foods. But sometimes just from a cost perspective, frozen or canned are the more convenient options for a lot of people. If you're going to do fresh fruits and vegetables, wash them as soon as you get home from the grocery store and then put them in the refrigerator right there at eyesight. My refrigerator, unfortunately, is built to where like the crisper drawers are kind of hidden. Guilty of how many times have you bought like a bag of salad and then you're like, oh, I forgot to eat that bag of salad and then I've got to throw it away, right? So now you've wasted your money and your salad. So putting things at eye view when you open your refrigerator. So if you're hungry and you're looking for a snack, those things are already washed or already cut up or available, easy for you to grab and see. And then even frozen ones too. You can steam them in the microwave. You can cook them on the stove. You can roast them in the oven. I love roasted vegetables. Those are one of my favorites too.
Oh yeah, they're delicious.
Yeah. For my kids too, I have things out at eye level in the refrigerator for them as well, so they know that they can go and grab things. I'd rather them grab one of those items first than go grab something out of the pantry.
So, but as a dietitian, fresh food is always the best, right? So you want to try to shop the outside of the grocery store. That's what I've
typically.
Always heard.
That's yes. Typically, yeah. And don't go to the grocery store hungry either. Guilty of that too. How many times have you gone to the grocery store hungry and you end up with things that you didn't plan on in your basket?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think the third thing is, this is hard to narrow it down to 3. Can I make 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please do. The more the better.
Okay. So my third one is watch what you drink too. There are a lot of calories in your favorite Starbucks beverage or your favorite fountain drink, right? I'm also guilty. I love myself some coffee. So, but all of those things do add up over time. So if you really are wanting to watch your weight or watch how many calories you're taking in through a day, be mindful of what you're drinking too, because it can be really easy to drink 500-600 calories worth of your day in just one beverage.
And what is the daily recommended kind of calorie count you should
So
be
when you
looking
look at choosemyplate.gov, that replaced the old food pyramid. It's called MyPlate now. They're based everything off of about a 2,000 calorie diet. Now, is that a one size fit all? Absolutely not. It's kind of the average for most people. But what you can do is you can go in and put your height and weight in there, and it'll kind of do an estimate. Now, on the hospital side, if you were sick and I was seeing you, I have much more kind of exact calculations I can do to kind of really get a precise number of how many calories and how many grams of protein you would need a day. But 2,000 is what the food label is based off of. You'll see that little mark based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. Same thing. So it's kind of a general number for just the general public to kind of stay around.
So like you said, 4 or 5 sodas, and you've more than done a quarter of your...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you do diet, or you do the zero sugar options, or if you try to cut back on the amount of creamer in your coffee, or the caramel drizzle, that's also really delicious on top of your coffee as well. My number 4 is move more, exercise. Today it's really pretty outside. Tomorrow, not going to be pretty because it's supposed to rain. But getting outside and moving, also good for your mental health too. Also good for mental health. And for me, I'm a kind of like, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to like give it my all. But I've had to learn to kind of dial that back a little bit when it comes to exercise, because like, hey, I'm going to start running, right? And for me, I would, in my head, I'm like, well, I'm going to go run 5 miles. Well, Blair, when's the last time you ran 5 miles, right? Okay. So starting slow is okay. So if you're not one that is used to walking, or if you're not used to exercising, start with just 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes you didn't do the day before, and then slowly work your way up.
Yeah, at the office, I try to get up at least twice an hour, go, even if it's just to walk around, but, go to somebody's office. And
my watch yells at me a lot. It's time to get up. It's time to get up when I've been sitting at my desk all day.
That's a good reminder.
Yes, it is. And a lot of the activity watches will buzz you now.
So you had said you have quite a tenure with UTMB.
I do.
What is it you love about working there?
I think the people and the patients, and now I get to say students, and that might sound a little cliche. I've had some amazing coworkers, and that's why I stay. I think the culture there is fantastic. Patients, I have met some incredible people. Sometimes working in organ transplant, I got to know my patients over long term, over months, years. Sometimes I knew these patients, we were taking care of them. And you get to know their families. And sometimes I felt like I learned more from the patients than they learned from me. Like, that is life-changing in itself. And now I get to teach graduate level students. So these are students that have finished a 4-year bachelor's degree and are coming to get their Master of Science degree with me. And they all come from different backgrounds. In my office suite, I have a map of the United States, and I have a red dot for every undergraduate institution they've come from, and it's all over. My goal is to have a dot in it from every state to come.
That'd be awesome.
To UTMB. But they all come from different backgrounds, male, female. Usually they all average about, early to mid 20s. So I get to reflect back on, I'm not getting any younger. I'm only getting older. And yet I still think sometimes I just finished college when I didn't. So I learn a lot from them too. Up and coming trends in technology or what's happening on social media, I learn so much. And that's why I stay.
Yeah.
I love it.
And how did you get into being a dietitian?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, actually. When I finished...
Hey, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
I sometimes I'll still wonder, what do I want to be when I grow up? When I finished high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I actually think I wanted to do interior design. That when in high school, they used to have us take these little tests of what would be your dream job, right? And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I don't know. I ended up, when I went to college, I went to an open house, and in the same building as the interior design program was the nutrition program, and I just happened to sit. And my mom worked at UTMB for many years and retired as a registered nurse. And so I was familiar with what she did as a nurse, but I wasn't sure I could be a nurse. And so when I learned a little bit more about what dietitians do, I liked to cook, I liked to eat, and I love the idea of being involved in healthcare and making a difference, but not have to deal with all the gory stuff, needles,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I felt that for me, being a dietitian, I kind of fell into it and I loved it. And I've never looked back since.
So you mentioned something life-changing, and changing your diet can be life-changing. I remember my dad went from eating, and I think we know how he had his heart attack. He was eating Big Macs or cheese sandwiches every day for lunch. And then after that, totally changed his diet and got at least another 10 good years out of just the total change. And one of it was moving,
Yes.
but most of it was eating.
Yes.
And it was just, it can change your life.
It can be. And I think people also, you don't have to focus just on the number on the scale moving. Actually, I tell people just often don't weigh yourself, but look at, are your clothes fitting differently? How about are your blood pressure readings any different? What about your cholesterol levels? When you go for a yearly checkup with your PCP, hopefully through UTMB, right? Are your numbers changing? Are they getting better? And those are all, I feel like, more substantial things. And I said this at the Galveston Women's Conferences. You're not defined by your weight, right? Everybody's body is different. Everybody's going to weigh a different number, but it's kind of those numbers on the inside that I think really are more life-changing. Cholesterol, A1C levels, blood pressure.
And speaking of that, like you talked about with your grad students, they teach you the fads. Mm-hmm. It seems like in food, there's a lot of fads. Like, so this is the next healthiest food you could ever eat. Mm-hmm. What really are, like, I've heard blueberries, people swear by blueberries, but what are really some of the healthiest things that you can eat?
There's so many. We could be here all day. There's in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they usually pick like the food of the year, right? I remember one year it was Brussels sprouts and the other year it was kale. I think there comes these trends, and I think it's fed from the media, kind of what people latch onto. But you've ever seen like really beautiful pictures of, like you mentioned, blueberries, like fresh blueberries, like in a basket or whatever. They make them look so good, right? I think anything fresh to me is really appetizing, like something in its true form. Mm-hmm. Right? So whether it's fresh fruit, I love going to the local farmers markets. Love, love, love. Because I think there's something to be said about when produce is grown locally in someone's farm. I think it tastes different than if it's been mass.
Well, I know it lasts longer, because when I go to the farmer's market and I bring it home, and it'll be in there for 2 weeks and it'll still be immaculate.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it makes you wonder what they're putting on it at the grocery store that doesn't make it last that long.
If you can get something in its like purest form, I feel like that's probably the best.
So the converse of that then, what is a food that people think is healthy, but they probably should stay away from?
Oh, man.
Because I've heard, they say, oh, don't eat red meat. Well, I think red meat actually in moderation is supposed to be very healthy for you.
Yes. The poor little egg got a bad rap for a long time. The egg. I think some people feel like they can't eat eggs because, and right now, eggs are a hot commodity.
Can't afford them.
They can't afford them, right? But I think for a long time, the egg got a bad rap because, it's going to raise your cholesterol. But eggs are really great, particularly the white of the egg. That's where all the protein is. So even if you toss the yolk, where I feel like a lot of the flavor is, right, that's where all the fat is. But the white part of the egg, that's where all your protein is. That's where all the good stuff is.
You keep mentioning protein. Is that kind of like one of the most important parts of the diet there?
So as we age, protein is really important for muscle health. So as we age, we tend to lose our lean muscle mass. That's just part of aging. And so if we can eat enough protein in our diet, which is going to range differently for everybody, so I'm not going to say a range. It depends on age and height and weight. But as we age, getting enough protein and moving, using kind of non-weight bearing or even light weights to help really keep our muscles toned as best as they can so that we prevent any further muscle loss.
And finally, anything else you want the audience to know before we wrap it up?
Nutrition is not one size fits all. So what may work for your neighbor may not work for you, and that's okay. And so what I would love for people to know is that don't feel like you have to compare yourself with everybody else. So if you try something and it doesn't work, but it works for somebody else, great. I think talking to a registered dietitian or your primary care provider is a great way to start on trying to come up with a plan that's going to work best for you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.